night when the world feels like it's crumbling beneath an unrelenting force, a blizzard so fierce it wraps your heart in ice, burying everything under a heavy, suffocating blanket of snow. The wind shrieked through the pines like a mournful cry, rattling the fragile walls of our little Colorado cabin, threatening to tear it apart. It was late January, the kind of cold that seeps into your very soul, numbing your fingers and stealing your breath. Then, through the chaos, a sound broke free, a desperate, relentless scratching at our gate, sharp and urgent, cutting through the storm's fury like a plea from the darkness. I'll never forget that moment. A pregnant German shepherd stood there, her black and tan coat glistening with ice, her brown eyes wide with a terror so raw it pierced me to the core. She pawed at the metal, her swollen belly trembling with the weight of life she carried, her soft whines rising above the wind like a mother's cry for help. My 6-year-old daughter, Ellie, pressed her small hands to the frosted window, her green eyes shimmering with tears that mirrored the snowflakes outside.
"Mommy, she needs us,"
she whispered, her voice quivering with a tender, innocent ache that gripped my heart and wouldn't let go. I'm Sarah, a single mom with a spirit patched together by hope and hardship. And in that instant, I felt Ellie's words sink into me like a call from fate. What Ellie did next wasn't just a fleeting act of kindness. It unraveled a mystery that shook our quiet mountain town to its roots, leaving us all in tears of awe and sorrow. Stay with us until the end. You won't believe where this journey leads, how it redefines courage and love. Like, share, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This story might just touch you too. The storm came down on us that night like a wrathful spirit, a merciless force of wind and snow that tore through the Colorado pines with a ferocity I'd never felt before. It was late January, and the world outside our small cabin seemed to vanish under the weight of the blizzard, swallowed whole by a swirling, relentless white. The windows rattled in their frames, groaning as if they might shatter under the onslaught, while the faint glow of the fireplace flickered nervously, casting trembling shadows across the wooden walls. I stoked the flames with hands that ached from years of hard work, whispering a silent prayer that the power wouldn't abandon us in this frozen chaos. I'm Sarah, a single mom whose life had been stitched together with threads of resilience and quiet grief, and on nights like this, the solitude felt heavier than ever. But I wasn't alone. There was Ellie, my little beacon of light, my 6-year-old daughter with a heart too big for her small frame. She sat curled up on the worn rug near the hearth, her green eyes tracing the pages of a tattered book about sheepdogs, heroes of the snow, loyal souls who braved the wild to protect their flocks. Her dark curls framed her face like a halo, and every so often she'd glance up at me with a smile that could melt the iciest despair. That night, though, her smile faded as the wind's howl grew louder, a primal scream that seemed to shake the very earth beneath us. She hugged the book closer, her small fingers tightening around its edges, as if the stories within could shield her from the tempest outside. Then, suddenly, she froze, her head tilting like a deer catching a scent on the breeze.
"Mommy, listen,"
she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, fragile yet piercing through the storm's roar like a needle through cloth. I paused, the fire poker still in my hand, and strained to hear over the wind's relentless wail. At first, there was nothing but the chaos of nature, the creaking pines, the snow pelting the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. But then it came, a faint, frantic scratching, sharp and insistent, rising from somewhere beyond the cabin's walls. It was followed by a sound that sent a shiver racing down my spine. A deep, mournful bark, low and resonant, as if it carried the weight of a soul in torment. My heart lurched, a sudden tightness gripping my chest. Ellie leapt to her feet, the book tumbling forgotten to the floor, and raced to the window, her small hands pressing against the frosted glass. Her breath fogged the pane in quick, uneven bursts, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and fear. "It's a dog, Mommy!" she cried, her voice trembling with urgency. She's out there all alone! I dropped the poker, the clatter swallowed by the storm, and hurried to her side, my own breath catching as I peered into the swirling darkness. The snow was a blinding veil, but through it I could just make out the shape at our gate. A shadow moving against the white, a figure fighting the wind with every step. Ellie's hands gripped my sleeve, her nails digging into the fabric as she pressed closer, her warmth a lifeline against the cold, seeping through the glass.
She's hurting, Mommy,
she whispered, her voice breaking with a sob she fought to hold back.
We can't leave her out there. She'll die.
Her words hit me like a punch, stirring something deep within me, a memory of nights when I'd felt lost and alone, praying someone would hear my silent cries. I wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, that the storm was a beast we couldn't tame, but the look in her eyes stopped me cold. There was a fire there, a fierce, unshakable compassion that I hadn't seen since the day she'd first smiled at me, a newborn in my trembling arms. She was my daughter, yes, but in that moment, she was something more. A force of love and determination that refused to turn away from suffering. My throat tightened, torn between the instinct to protect her and the pull of that desperate sound echoing through the night. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if the creature beyond the gate knew we were there, knew we were its last chance. I glanced at Ellie, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the fire, and saw the plea in her eyes, not just for the dog, but for me, to trust her, to believe in the goodness she still held on to so fiercely. My hands shook as I reached for my coat, the weight of her faith settling over me like a mantle. "Stay here," I said, my voice rough with emotion. But she nodded, her trust in me absolute. The storm roared on, a merciless wall between us and whatever waited outside. But in that moment, I knew we weren't just facing the wind. Something had found us, something that needed us more than I could yet understand, and it was calling us into the dark. I stood beside Ellie at the window, my breath mingling with hers on the cold glass, our reflections faint against the storm's wild dance. The blizzard outside was a living thing, a roaring beast of snow and wind that swallowed the world beyond our cabin, leaving only shadows and whispers of what might be. But then I saw her, a German shepherd, her black and tan coat crusted with ice, her form a trembling silhouette against the gate. She clawed at the metal with a desperation that echoed in my chest, her swollen belly swaying beneath her, heavy with the promise of life yet to come. Her brown eyes, wide and glistening, locked onto mine through the swirling white, and in that gaze, I felt something break open inside me, a raw, unspoken plea that reached past the storm, past the walls I'd built around my heart, and sank deep into the places I'd tried to forget. "She's hurting, Mommy!" Ellie cried, her voice cracking with a sorrow too big for her small body, her hands tugging at my sleeve with a frantic need I couldn't ignore. "We have to help her. She's all alone out there." Her words trembled, each one laced with a child's unshakable faith in the power of kindness, a belief that even in the darkest nights, no one should be left to suffer. I wanted to pull her close, to shield her from the storm's cruelty and the unknown danger that might lurk beyond our door. But her eyes, those green, tear-filled eyes, held me captive. They were mirrors of my own buried longing, a reminder of the times I'd stood on the edge of despair, hoping someone would see me, would reach out. How could I turn away now, when she looked at me like I was the one who could make it right? I hesitated, my hand hovering over the coat rack, the weight of fear pressing against my ribs. Strays weren't strangers in these mountains. Lost hunters' dogs, abandoned pets, wild things hardened by the hills. But this German shepherd was different. There was a grace in her stance, a quiet dignity beneath the ice and exhaustion, as if she'd once known a home, a hand that fed her, a voice that called her name. Her gaze wasn't feral or fleeting. It was steady, piercing, almost human in its intensity, and it stirred a memory I couldn't place, a flicker of recognition, a whisper of something lost. "Stay here," I murmured to Ellie, my voice rough with the storm raging inside me, a battle between caution and the pull of that desperate creature beyond the gate. She nodded, her small frame rooted by the window, her trust in me a fragile thread I clung to as I pulled on my coat. Stepping into the storm was like walking into a nightmare. The wind hit me hard, a brutal slap that stole my breath and stung my eyes with icy tears. Snow swirled around me, a blinding shroud that erased the world beyond a few feet. But I pushed forward, guided by the sound of her scratching. Now louder, more insistent, a rhythm of survival beating against the chaos. My boots crunched through the drifts, each step a fight against the cold that clawed at my skin, but I couldn't stop. Not when I could still see her eyes in my mind, those windows to a soul that refused to surrender. As I reached the gate, she whined, a soft, broken sound that cut through the wind like a knife, piercing me with its vulnerability. She pressed closer, her cold nose brushing my hand as I fumbled with the latch, her warmth a fleeting promise against the numbness creeping into my fingers. Up close, she was more than a shadow in the snow. Her fur, though matted with ice, shimmered with the echoes of care, once brushed, once loved. And her ears, though pinned back against the wind, twitched with a quiet alertness. That belly, swollen and trembling, spoke of life fighting to be born, a mother's burden she carried through the storm. But it was her eyes that undid me. Deep brown pools brimming with fear and hope, staring into me as if she'd crossed miles of frozen hell to find us, to find me.
Who are you?
I whispered, my voice lost to the wind, but she tilted her head, her whine softening into something like relief, as if my presence alone was enough to ease her terror. I glanced back at the cabin, Ellie's small silhouette framed in the window, her hands still pressed to the glass, watching, waiting. My heart ached with the weight of her faith, her belief that we could be the ones to save this stranger who'd stumbled into our lives. The wind howled louder, a warning I couldn't heed. Not now, not when this German shepherd had chosen us, her paws scraping at the gate like a knock on my soul. She hadn't just wandered here by chance, she'd come with purpose, with a story she couldn't tell, and in that moment, I knew. Whatever she was running from, whatever she needed, we were already part of it. The wind roared like a beast unleashed as I unlatched the gate, my fingers trembling against the icy metal, numb from the cold that bit deeper with every gust. She stood there, the German shepherd, her black and tan coat shimmering with frost, her swollen belly swaying as she took a tentative step toward me. She didn't growl or shy away. There was no wildness in her, only a quiet surrender, a trust so fragile it broke something inside me. Her eyes, those deep brown pools of fear and hope, stayed locked on mine, and in that moment, I felt the weight of her journey crash over me like a wave. She'd fought through the storm, through pain I couldn't yet fathom, to reach us, to reach me. Up close, I saw the gash on her flank, a dark, crusted wound that spoke of battles endured, of nights spent running from shadows I couldn't see.
Come on, girl,
I whispered, my voice trembling with a tenderness I hadn't known I still possessed, a softness that rose unbidden from the depths of my weary heart. She limped forward, her body shivering beneath the weight of exhaustion and the life she carried, and I guided her through the gate, my hand brushing her cold fur as if to promise her safety I wasn't sure I could give. The storm raged around us, a howling wall of snow that threatened to swallow her frail form, but she pressed on, her nose nudging my hand. A touch so gentle it felt like a plea, a silent thank you for not turning her away. My boots sank into the drifts as I led her back to the cabin, the wind clawing at my coat, stinging my eyes with tears I couldn't blame on the cold alone. Ellie's face at the window was a beacon, her small hands pressed to the glass, her green eyes wide with a mixture of awe and urgency that spurred me forward. This wasn't just a stray. This was a mother, a soul who'd chosen us in her darkest hour, and I couldn't fail her. The moment we crossed the threshold, warmth enveloped us, the fire's glow chasing away the storm's bite. Ellie's gasp filled the room, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy as the German shepherd shook snow onto the rug. her icy coat shedding flakes that melted into tiny puddles on the worn wood.
She's so beautiful,
Ellie cried, her voice trembling with wonder as she dropped to her knees beside the dog, her small hands hovering as if afraid to break something precious.
Look at her tummy, Mommy. She's having babies.
Her words danced with excitement, but beneath them lay a thread of awe, a reverence for the life trembling before us. I knelt too, my breath catching as I took her in, the way her ribs pressed faintly against her fur, the way her swollen belly pulsed with the promise of pups waiting to be born. She sank to the floor by the fireplace, her legs folding beneath her like a sigh, her breaths heavy with the exhaustion of a journey I could only imagine. I reached for her collar, my fingers brushing the worn leather, its edges frayed by time and struggle. No tags dangled there, no jingle of metal to tell me where she'd come from. Just a faint engraving, blurred and scratched, as if someone had tried to erase her past. The firelight flickered over her, casting shadows that danced across her matted coat, once sleek and proud, now tangled with the grit of survival. Ellie ran to the laundry basket, her footsteps a patter of purpose, and returned with an armful of towels, her face alight with a determination that mirrored the dog's own.
She's cold, Mommy. We have to warm her up,
she said, her voice firm despite the quiver in it, and she draped the towels over the German Shepherd with a care that made my chest ache. Her small hands moved gently, smoothing the fabric, whispering reassurances I couldn't hear over the crackle of the fire. I watched as the dog lifted her head, her brown eyes meeting Ellie's with a gratitude that needed no words. A soft whine escaped her throat, a sound so tender it pierced me, and Ellie giggled, her laughter a melody that filled the room with light.
She likes us, Mommy,
she said, her joy a balm against the storm still howling outside. But as I knelt beside her, my hand resting on her damp fur, I felt something deeper, a connection, a thread tying us to this stranger who'd stumbled into our lives. Those eyes, sharp and alive despite her weariness, watched us both, searching, trusting, as if we were the end of a long, desperate road. She'd come to us not just for shelter, but for something more, something we didn't yet understand, something that would change us forever. The storm battered the cabin, but inside, by the fire, a quiet promise took root, fragile and fierce, born of a mother's courage and a child's unwavering heart. The cabin hummed with a fragile stillness as the storm raged on outside, its howls a distant chorus to the quiet unfolding within our walls. Ellie knelt by the German Shepherd, her small hands smoothing the towels she'd draped over the trembling creature, her green eyes alight with a tenderness that seemed too vast for her 6 years. The fire crackled, casting golden flickers across the dog's matted fur, and I sat beside them, drawn into the orbit of this stranger who'd stumbled into our lives with a desperation we couldn't yet name. She lay by the hearth, her swollen belly rising and falling with each labored breath, her presence a mystery that tugged at the edges of my heart. Ellie chattered softly, her voice a gentle stream of wonder. "Shadow? Stormy? What's your name?" As if naming her could weave her into our world, could erase the shadows clinging to her like frost. I reached out, my fingers brushing her fur, once sleek and proud, now tangled with the grit of a journey I could only imagine. It was warm beneath the dampness, alive with a pulse that spoke of resilience, of battles fought in silence. The gash on her flank caught my eye, a jagged line, crusted with blood, healing but raw, a testament to pain she'd carried through the storm. My chest tightened as I traced its edges, imagining the claws or teeth or cruel hands that had marked her, the nights she'd endured alone, driven by a will I couldn't fathom. Her belly pulsed beneath my touch, a ripple of life waiting to break free, and I marveled at her strength. A mother, battered but unbroken, who'd found her way to us against all odds. Ellie's hands stilled as I tilted the dog's collar toward the firelight, the worn leather rough against my fingertips. Its edges were frayed, its surface scratched, and I squinted to decipher the faint engraving carved into it. Letters blurred by time and struggle. "Luna," I read aloud, the name slipping from my lips like a secret unearthed, and her ears flicked, a soft whine rising from her throat as if I'd spoken a word she'd been waiting to hear. "Luna!" Ellie echoed, her voice bursting with delight, her giggle a melody that danced through the room. "She knows her name, Mommy! She likes it!" Her joy was infectious, a spark that lit the shadows, but beneath it, I felt a shiver of something deeper, a connection, a thread tying us to this soul who'd chosen us in her darkest hour. I turned the collar again, my fingers brushing a scratched-out number etched beside her name, a ghost of a past someone had tried to erase. The leather felt heavier now, laden with questions I couldn't answer. Where had she come from? Who had she left behind? My hand lingered, and then I felt it. A faint bulge, a hidden pocket sewn into the collar's underside, its stitches tight and deliberate. My breath caught, a pulse of unease rippling through me. "What's this?" I murmured, more to myself than to Ellie, but her eyes widened, her small frame leaning closer as I worked the pocket open with trembling fingers. What was Luna carrying? What had she brought to our door? Outside, the blizzard screamed, a relentless wall of wind and snow that locked us in with her mystery, its fury a mirror to the storm brewing in my mind. Luna shifted, her head lifting to watch me, those brown eyes sharp and alive despite the exhaustion etching her frame. There was no fear in her gaze now, only trust, a quiet certainty that we were the ones she'd been searching for. My heart thudded as I traced the pocket's edge, the fire's warmth no match for the chill creeping up my spine. Ellie's hand found mine, her fingers small and warm, and she whispered, "She's telling us something, Mommy." Her voice was soft but sure, a child's intuition that cut through my doubt like a blade. Luna paced then, a restless circle by the fire, her claws clicking faintly on the wood, her gaze darting to the door as if the storm held more than wind, as if it carried echoes of what she'd fled. I watched her, my throat tight with a mix of awe and dread. She wasn't just a stray seeking shelter. She was a messenger, a bearer of secrets stitched into her very being. The cabin felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of her presence, and I knew this night was only the beginning. Ellie nestled closer, her head resting against my arm, and I felt her trust, her belief that we could unravel this, that we could be the ones to save Luna from whatever haunted her steps. The fire popped, a spark leaping free, and in its fleeting light, I saw it. Luna's eyes, fixed on us, pleading for us to listen, to understand, to follow where her courage had led. The firelight danced across the cabin walls, a fragile shield against the storm's relentless howl, but the warmth couldn't touch the chill that settled in my bones as I knelt beside Luna. Ellie's small form hovered close, her green eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and worry, her breath soft and quick as she watched me trace the hidden pocket in Luna's collar. The leather was rough beneath my fingers, its stitches taut with purpose, and I felt a tremor of anticipation. Or was it dread? As I pried it open, my hands trembling like leaves caught in the wind. Luna's brown eyes followed every move, sharp and steady, her body still except for the faint rise and fall of her swollen belly, a quiet testament to the life she carried through the storm. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what we might uncover, and I couldn't shake the sense that this moment was a threshold, a door we were about to step through, into a story we weren't prepared to hear. A scrap of paper slipped free, damp and crumpled, its edges curling as if it had clung to her through miles of snow and despair. I unfolded it with care, my breath catching as the fire's glow revealed shaky, smudged ink. Save me. 2247 Pine Ridge. No name, no signature, just an address and a plea scrawled in haste, trembling with a fear I could feel in my own chest. The words sank into me like a stone, cold and unyielding, stirring a wave of empathy for the unseen soul who'd written them, a voice crying out from the dark.
What does it mean, Mommy?
Ellie asked, her voice a quiver of innocence and curiosity, her small hand brushing mine as she leaned closer, her curls tumbling over her shoulder. I looked into her eyes, so bright and trusting, and felt my throat tighten. I didn't know, couldn't know. But the urgency in that note clawed at me, a silent scream that echoed Luna's own desperate journey to our gate. Luna nudged my hand then, her cold nose pressing against my skin, her whine sharp and insistent, as if she could sense the weight of those words, as if she were begging me to understand what she couldn't say. Her eyes met mine, deep and pleading, and I saw it. The trust she'd placed in us, the hope that had driven her through the blizzard to find this cabin, this moment. My heart ached with the magnitude of it, with the realization that she wasn't just a stray seeking shelter. She was a messenger, a mother carrying more than her pups, carrying a cry for help stitched into her very being.
She's trying to tell us something,
Ellie whispered, her voice soft but certain, her small fingers tracing Luna's fur as if she could read the story etched there. Her faith in Luna, in me, was a lifeline, a thread of light in the shadows creeping closer. I clutched the note, its damp edges crumpling in my grip, and tried to steady my racing thoughts. 2247. Pine Ridge. It was a place I vaguely knew, a lonely stretch near the old mill, abandoned and forgotten by most. But now it loomed in my mind like a specter, a destination tied to Luna's scars, to the terror that lingered in her restless pacing. "We'll figure it out tomorrow," I said, my voice rough with emotion as I turned to Ellie, her small frame curling into the blanket I pulled around her shoulders. "Let's get you to bed." She nodded, her eyes heavy but still fixed on Luna, her trust unwavering even as sleep tugged at her. I tucked her in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, but my hands shook as I smoothed her curls. Tomorrow felt too far away, a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Back by the fire, Luna's pacing grew frantic, her claws clicking on the wood, her gaze darting to the door as the storm's roar swelled outside. I sank beside her, the note still clutched in my hand, its words burning into my memory. "Save me." Who had written it? Who had Luna left behind or run from to bring this message to us? The cabin walls pressed in, the air thick with questions I couldn't answer, and I felt the weight of her trust settle over me like a mantle. She'd come to us, wounded and pregnant, carrying this scrap of paper like a lifeline, and now it was ours to hold, ours to unravel. The storm wasn't the only thing she feared. I could see it in the way her ears twitched, the way her body tensed as if listening for footsteps in the snow. Time was slipping away, a tide pulling us toward something vast and unknown, and as I rested my hand on her fur, feeling the pulse of her strength, I knew. Whatever she'd fled, whatever she needed us to do, it was closing in and we were already part of her fight. Sleep eluded me that night, the storm's relentless howl weaving through my restless thoughts, a backdrop to the weight of Luna's presence by the fire. The cabin was a cocoon of warmth, the flames casting a soft glow over her trembling form, but the air felt charged, heavy with the unspoken story she'd carried to our door. I sat on the rug, the note, "Save me." 2247 Pine Ridge, crumpled in my hand, its words a haunting refrain I couldn't shake. Luna's brown eyes flickered between me and the shadows, her swollen belly a quiet promise beneath the towels Ellie had draped over her with such care. The clock ticked past midnight, each second stretching into eternity, when a soft whimper broke the silence. A sound so tender, so pained, it pulled me from my haze. Luna shifted, her breaths quickening, and I felt my heart leap as I realized what was happening. "Ellie, wake up! She's having her babies!" I called, my voice trembling with a mix of awe and urgency, the words tumbling out as I scrambled to her side. Ellie stumbled from her room, her small feet pattering on the wood, her green eyes bleary but bright with wonder as she rubbed sleep from them. "Really, Mommy?" she whispered, her voice a thread of excitement as she knelt beside Luna, her blanket trailing behind her like a cape. Luna strained on the rug, her body tensing with effort, and I held my breath as the first pup emerged, a tiny black and tan bundle, slick and still, until her gentle licks brought it to life. A soft squeak pierced the air, and Ellie gasped, her hands clasping together as tears welled in her eyes.
She's a mommy now,
she breathed, her joy a burst of light in the dim room, a child's wonder at the miracle unfolding before us. The second pup came quickly, then a third, each one squirming toward Luna's warmth, their tiny forms a testament to her strength, her will to survive. My chest ached with a fierce pride I couldn't name, a reverence for this German shepherd who'd fought through the storm to bring her babies into the world under our roof. Ellie's small hands hovered near them, trembling with the urge to touch, to comfort, but she held back, her respect for Luna's quiet labor a wisdom beyond her years.
"They're so little,"
she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, and I nodded, my own throat tight as I watched Luna tend to her newborns, her tongue gentle but sure, her eyes gleaming with a mother's fierce love. But then the fourth pup came, still, silent, trapped in its sack, a fragile life teetering on the edge.
"Mommy, it's not moving,"
Ellie sobbed, her voice breaking with a panic that mirrored my own, her small body pressing against me as tears spilled down her cheeks. My heart lurched, a surge of fear and helplessness crashing over me, but instinct took hold. I tore the membrane with shaking fingers, rubbing the pup's tiny chest, willing breath into its lungs. Time stretched, each second a lifetime, until a faint squeak broke free, a fragile spark of life that drew a cry from Ellie's lips. "It's alive!" she cheered, her tears turning to laughter, her small hands clapping as the pup squirmed toward its siblings. I sank back, my hands trembling, tears pricking my own eyes as Luna's gaze met mine. Exhausted, radiant, brimming with a gratitude that needed no words. Raven, Coal, Mist, and Spark, Ellie named them, her voice a song of triumph, each name a gift to the lives we'd helped bring into being. Luna sighed, her body relaxing as her pups nursed, their tiny mouths tugging at her with a hunger that spoke of survival, of hope. I rested my hand on her fur, feeling the pulse of her strength, the warmth of a mother who'd defied the odds to reach this moment. Ellie nestled beside me, her head on my shoulder, her breath slowing as she watched them, her love a tangible thing that wrapped around us all.
"She's so brave, Mommy,"
she murmured, her voice soft with awe, and I nodded, my heart swelling with the truth of it. Luna's courage had carried her here, to us, to this fragile, beautiful birth in the dead of night. But even as the pups settled, Luna's ears stayed sharp, her gaze flickering to the door, her body tense beneath the calm. The storm raged on outside, its fury a reminder of the world she'd fled, and I felt a shadow linger, a whisper of the danger she'd brought with her, the mystery still stitched into her collar. This moment of joy was a gift, a fleeting sanctuary, but her restless watchfulness told me it wasn't the end. She'd given us her trust, her babies, her hope. And now, as the fire burned low, I knew we were bound to her, to the fight she'd carried through the snow, a fight we'd only begun to understand. Dawn crept into the cabin like a hesitant guest, its gray light seeping through the frosted windows, softening the edges of a night that had left us forever changed. The storm had eased to a whisper, a scattering of flurries drifting past the glass, but the air still held a brittle chill, a reminder of the chaos that had brought Luna to us. She lay by the fire, her black and tan fur a patchwork of strength and scars, her newborn pups nestled against her, their tiny bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of life she'd fought to give them. Raven, Coal, Mist, and Spark. Ellie's names for them echoed in my mind, a quiet hymn of hope born in the dark. The sight of them, so fragile yet fierce, tugged at my heart, a tender ache that mingled with the pride I felt for Luna, this mother who'd defied the storm to find us. Ellie knelt beside her, her small hands steady as she offered scraps of bacon from last night's supper. her green eyes glowing with a love that seemed to spill over, warming the room more than the dying embers ever could.
They're hungry, Mommy,
she said, her voice soft with wonder as Luna accepted the food, her tongue brushing Ellie's fingers with a gentleness that broke me open. The pups squirmed closer, their tiny yips a chorus of need, and I marveled at the bond already forming. Ellie and Luna, two souls tethered by a night of miracles, by a trust that felt ancient, unbreakable. I sat cross-legged on the rug, the note, "Save me," 2247 Pine Ridge, still folded in my pocket, its weight a quiet pulse against my thigh, a mystery I couldn't yet face in the light of this fragile piece. But then Luna's ears pricked, her body tensing beneath the calm, and her gaze snapped to the window with a sharpness that sent a shiver racing down my spine. I followed her stare, my breath catching as a shadow flickered across the snow. A man, his dark coat stark against the white, standing just beyond our fence. He was motionless, a silhouette carved from the morning's gray, his presence a violation of the sanctuary we'd built. Luna's growl rumbled low, a deep, protective sound that vibrated through the floor, her stance shifting to shield her pups, her hackles rising like a wall between them and the stranger outside. My heart thudded, a wild drumbeat of fear and instinct, and I whispered, "Stay here," to Ellie, my voice trembling as I grabbed my phone from the table, my hands shaking too much to steady it. Ellie froze, her small frame curling closer to Luna, her eyes wide with a terror she couldn't name.
Who's that, Mommy?
She asked, her voice a thread of panic, and I couldn't answer, didn't know, but the fear in Luna's growl told me enough. This wasn't a lost traveler, a neighbor seeking shelter. This was something darker, something tied to the gash on her flank, to the note she'd carried through the snow. I snapped a photo through the glass, the blur of the man's shape all I could capture before he turned, slipping into the trees like a ghost swallowed by the pines. My hands shook as I dialed Sheriff Daniels, the numbers blurring through tears I hadn't realized were falling, my voice a jagged whisper when he answered. "There's someone outside. Luna's scared, and I don't know why." Luna's growl softened as the shadow vanished, but her eyes stayed fixed on the window, her body a taut line of vigilance, her pups tucked beneath her as if she could shield them from the world beyond. I sank beside her, my hand resting on her fur, feeling the tremor of her fear beneath the warmth, and Ellie crawled into my lap, her small arms wrapping around me, her breath hitching with a sob she fought to hold back.
She doesn't like him,
she whispered, her voice small but certain, her fingers clutching Luna's towel like a lifeline. I nodded, my throat tight with a dread I couldn't shake, the note burning in my pocket like a coal. Save me. Whoever he was, Luna knew him, and the terror in her stance clawed at me, a mirror to the panic rising in my chest. The storm might have faded, but its echoes lingered in the silence, in the shadow that had crossed our yard, in the mystery Luna had brought to our door. She'd come to us for refuge, for her pups, but now I saw it. She'd brought her fight too, a battle we'd only glimpsed in the snow. My hand tightened on my phone, the sheriff's promise to come ringing in my ears, but it felt distant, fragile against the weight of Luna's gaze. She'd trusted us with her life, with her babies, and now, as the morning light grew colder, I knew we were part of something bigger, something that watched from the trees, waiting, and I couldn't turn away from her, from us, from the shadow that refused to fade. The cabin felt smaller after the shadow slipped away, its walls pressing in with a quiet that wasn't peace, but the hush before a storm's next breath. The morning light filtered through the windows, cold and gray, casting long fingers across the rug where Luna lay, her pups nestled against her, their tiny forms a fragile anchor in the unease that clung to us. Ellie sat beside her, her small hands stroking Luna's fur with a gentleness that belied the tremor in her fingers, her green eyes still wide with the echo of fear from that fleeting figure beyond the fence. I paced by the fire, the phone still warm in my hand from the call to Sheriff Daniels, my heart a tangled knot of dread and determination. Luna's growl had faded, but her ears stayed pricked, her brown eyes darting to the door, her body a shield over raven, coal, mist, and spark. A mother's instinct I understood too well, a fierce love that mirrored the ache in my chest for Ellie. The crunch of boots on snow announced his arrival an hour later, a sound that broke the silence like a lifeline tossed into churning waters. Sheriff Daniels stepped inside, his broad frame filling the doorway, his weathered face softening as Ellie offered a shy wave, her blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. He tipped his hat, snow dusting his coat, and I felt a flicker of relief. Here was someone solid, someone who might make sense of the chaos Luna had brought to our door. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice gruff but kind, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Luna. "Heard you had a visitor." I nodded, my throat tight as I handed him the note. "Save me. 2247 Pine Ridge," its damp edges curling in his calloused hands, the photo of the blurred shadow trembling on my phone as I passed it over. He studied the note first, his brow furrowing as the words sank in, then squinted at the photo, the man's dark shape a ghost against the snow. 2247 Pine Ridge, he murmured, rubbing his jaw. "That's up near the old mill. Been abandoned since Tara Miles disappeared 2 months back." The name hit me like a stone, a ripple of recognition I couldn't place, and Luna's ears twitched, her gaze sharpening as if she knew it too. "Tara Miles?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, and Daniels nodded, his eyes drifting to Luna's gash, the jagged scar that told a story of its own. She lived out there alone, kept to herself. Folks thought she'd moved on, but no one's seen her since. "Was she—" He gestured to Luna, his question hanging heavy, and I shrugged, my hands twisting together. "I don't know. Her collar says Luna, but there's no proof, just that note, and the way she reacted to that man." Daniels knelt beside her, his movements slow, respectful, and Luna watched him, her body tense but still, her pups tucked beneath her as if she could shield them from the questions circling us. "This gash," he said, his voice low, "looks like it's healing. Maybe a week old. She's been through something, that's for sure." He took the note, folding it into his pocket, his jaw tight with a resolve I clung to. "I'll check the address, see what I can dig up. That shadow you saw could be nothing, could be trouble. Keep your doors locked." His words were steady, a promise of action, but they couldn't erase the chill that lingered, the sense that Luna's past was creeping closer, its claws scraping at our fragile sanctuary. As he stood, Ellie crept forward, her small voice breaking the silence. "She's scared of that man, Mommy," she said, her eyes glistening as she hugged Luna's towel closer, her faith in the dog's silent story unwavering. "She came to us for help." Her words pierced me, a child's truth that carried more weight than I could bear, and I nodded, pulling her into my arms, her warmth a shield against the dread pooling in my gut. Daniels tipped his hat again, his truck rumbling to life outside, its sound fading into the snow, but Luna's pacing resumed the moment he was gone. Slow, restless circles by the fire, her claws clicking like a heartbeat on the wood. I sank beside her, my hand resting on her fur, feeling the tremor beneath her strength, the note's echo. "Save me," a plea that bound us to her, to Tara, to a fight we hadn't chosen but couldn't abandon. Ellie nestled against me, her breath soft and uneven, and I felt her trust, her belief that we could be Luna's refuge, her heroes. The storm had faded, but its shadow lingered in Luna's watchful eyes, in the mystery she'd carried to our door. Whatever she'd escaped, whatever had sent that man to our fence, it was circling closer. And as the morning grew colder, I knew we were no longer just a shelter. We were part of her story, part of the fight she'd brought through the snow, and there was no turning back. The afternoon sun hung low, its weak light spilling through the cabin windows, casting a pale glow over the rug where Ellie played with Luna's pups, their tiny yips a fragile melody against the silence that had settled after Sheriff Daniels' departure. Raven, Coal, Mist, and Spark tumbled over each other, their small bodies a testament to Luna's courage, a living echo of the night she'd fought to bring them into the world. Ellie's laughter danced through the room, her green eyes bright with a joy that warmed the cold edges of my heart. But beneath it, I felt a restless current, a thread of unease that refused to let go. Luna sat nearby, her black and tan fur still matted from the storm, her brown eyes watching her pups with a tenderness that broke me. Yet her ears stayed pricked, her gaze flickering to the door as if the shadow from the snow lingered in her mind. I sank beside her, my fingers tracing the worn leather of her collar, the faint engraving, Luna, a name that felt like a key to a lock I couldn't yet open. The scratched-out number beside it teased my eyes, a ghost of digits blurred by time and struggle, and I tilted it to the light, my breath catching as the shapes resolved. 970550198. My pulse quickened, a surge of hope and fear tangling in my chest. This was something, a thread to pull, a chance to unravel the mystery she'd carried to us. Ellie glanced up, her small hands pausing as she cradled Spark, her voice soft with curiosity.
What are you doing, Mommy?
I forced a smile, my throat tight. Just checking something, Sweet Pea, I said. But my hands shook as I reached for my phone, the weight of Luna's trust pressing against me like a hand on my shoulder. I dialed the number, each ring a heartbeat echoing in the stillness, and when a voice answered, fragile, hesitant, a whisper from the edge of breaking, my world tilted.
Hello?
It said, and I swallowed hard, my voice trembling as I spoke. I found a German shepherd named Luna with a note. Save me. It had this number. A gasp broke through the line, followed by a sob that pierced me, raw and ragged, a sound of relief and terror woven together. I'm Tara, she said, her words tumbling out like a dam bursting. Oh God, she found you. Thank you, keep her safe, he's coming for her. The line went dead before I could respond, a silence that roared louder than the storm, leaving me clutching the phone, my breath shallow as Tara's fear seeped into me, a mirror to the dread I'd seen in Luna's eyes. Luna whined then, her nose brushing the phone, her brown gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that stole my breath. She knew. And the sound she made, soft and urgent, was a plea, a bridge between us and the voice that had just faded. Ellie crawled closer, her small frame pressing against me, her eyes wide with a question she couldn't fully form.
Was that her mom?
She asked, her voice trembling with a child's hope, her hands clutching Spark as if to anchor herself. Maybe, I whispered, my heart racing as I met Luna's stare, seeing the depth of her story reflected there. A mother who'd run, wounded and pregnant, carrying a cry for help across miles of snow to find us. Tara's words, "He's coming," rang in my ears, a warning that tightened the knot in my chest, a shadow drawing nearer with every passing moment. I pulled Ellie into my lap, her warmth a shield against the cold seeping through me, and Luna shifted closer, her head resting near my knee, her pups tumbling around her with a trust that broke my heart.
She's scared, isn't she?
Ellie murmured, her fingers tracing Luna's fur, her intuition cutting through the silence like a light in the dark. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, the note in my pocket a burning weight. Save me. Tara's voice, Luna's scars, the man in the snow. They wove together, a tapestry of danger and desperation that Luna had carried to our door. She'd chosen us, trusted us, and now I felt it, the weight of her secret, the burden of a fight she couldn't wage alone. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in with the echo of Tara's fear, the shadow of a threat I couldn't see but could feel in Luna's restless watchfulness. She'd run to us, her pups, her strength, her hope, and now we were part of her story, a story of survival, of a bond forged in the wild that refused to break. I held Ellie tighter, my hand resting on Luna's fur, feeling the pulse of her courage, and knew, whatever hunted her, whatever Tara feared, It was closing in, its claws already scraping at the edges of our fragile peace. We weren't just her shelter anymore. We were her allies, her family, bound by a secret whispered through the storm. Night draped the cabin in a heavy shroud, the silence thick and oppressive after a day that had unraveled us thread by thread. Ellie slept upstairs, her small form curled around Raven, Cole, Mist, and Spark, their tiny breaths a faint lullaby that couldn't soothe the storm brewing in my chest. I sat by the fire, its embers glowing dimly, casting long shadows that danced across Luna's vigilant form. She lay near the hearth, her black and tan fur a patchwork of strength and scars, her brown eyes fixed on the door with a tension that mirrored my own. Tara's voice, "He's coming," echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain woven with the note in my pocket. "Save me." And I felt the weight of Luna's trust pressing against me, a silent vow I'd made to protect her, to protect us all, even as fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. The clock struck midnight, its chime a soft toll in the stillness, when the lights flickered and died, plunging us into a darkness so complete it stole my breath. Luna's growl rumbled low, a deep, primal sound that vibrated through the floor, her body springing upright as her pups stirred beneath her. My heart lurched, a wild thudding against my ribs, and I grabbed the poker from the fireplace, its cold iron a lifeline in my trembling hands. "Ellie, hide!" I hissed up the stairs, my voice a jagged whisper, praying she'd hear, praying she'd stay safe as the sound of shattering glass erupted downstairs, a violent wound in the night that tore through our fragile sanctuary. Luna's growl sharpened, her hackles rising, and I felt her fear coil around me, a mirror to the terror surging in my veins. Footsteps thudded below, heavy and deliberate, and a man's voice snarled through the dark. "Give me my dog!" Each word a blade that sliced through the silence, chilling me to the bone. Luna charged down the stairs, a blur of fury and grace, her snarls echoing as I stumbled after her, the poker raised, my pulse a frantic drumbeat. I heard a shout, a crash, something heavy hitting the floor, and then a gunshot split the air, a deafening crack that stopped my heart. "Luna!" Ellie's scream tore from the stairwell, her small voice piercing the chaos, and I turned to see her silhouette, her blanket trailing as she clutched the railing, tears streaming down her face. "No, no, no!" I choked, racing toward her, my body a shield as I pulled her close, her sobs shaking us both. The darkness pulsed with danger, but then red and blue lights flashed through the windows, cutting through the night like a beacon. Sheriff Daniels burst through the door, his flashlight slicing the shadows, his voice barking orders as he pinned a bleeding man to the floor, a wiry figure, his arm marked by Luna's teeth, his curses swallowed by the chaos. I sank to my knees, Ellie clinging to me, her small hands fisting my shirt as I searched the dark for Luna. She whimpered from the corner, her body slumped near the overturned table, a graze weeping red on her shoulder, but alive. Alive. Her brown eyes blazing with defiance as she dragged herself closer, her pup's safety, her only tether. "Luna!" Ellie cried again, breaking free to throw herself beside her, her tears soaking into Luna's fur as she chanted, "You're okay! You're okay!" A desperate prayer against the blood staining the floor. I crawled to them, my hands shaking as I touched Luna's side, feeling the warmth beneath the wound, the pulse of a life that refused to break. Daniel's flashlight swept over us, his face grim as he cuffed the man, his voice cutting through my daze. "He's done. Stay with her." The intruder glared, his eyes wild with rage, but Luna's steady gaze met mine, unyielding, victorious, a mother who'd faced the dark for us, for her babies, for Tara. Ellie's sobs softened, her small arms wrapping around Luna's neck, her love a shield against the nightmare that had breached our walls. The cabin trembled with the aftermath, the air thick with the scent of gunpowder and fear, but Luna's presence anchored us, her courage a light in the chaos. Daniel's deputies swarmed in, their voices a distant hum as I held Ellie close, her heartbeat a frantic echo of my own. Luna had fought, not just for herself, but for us, for the fragile family we'd become in the storm's shadow. The sheriff's lights pulsed outside, a promise of justice, but it was Luna's whine, soft and steady, that grounded me, a sound of survival that wove us tighter into her story. She'd trusted us, bled for us, and as I pressed my hand to her fur, feeling her strength, I knew the fight wasn't over, but we were in it together, bound by a night that had tested us all. The cabin trembled in the wake of the break-in, its walls echoing with the fading chaos as the red and blue lights of Sheriff Daniel's truck pulsed outside, a lifeline piercing the night's heavy shroud. Ellie clung to Luna, her small arms wrapped around the German shepherd's neck, her tears soaking into the black and tan fur as she whispered,
"You're okay. You're okay."
a mantra that held us together when everything else felt broken. I knelt beside them, my hands trembling as I brushed Luna's side, the graze on her shoulder weeping red, a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered our fragile peace. Her brown eyes met mine, weary but fierce, a mother's strength shining through the pain, and I felt a sob rise in my throat, a mix of relief, awe, and a bone-deep fear that we'd come so close to losing her, to losing everything she'd fought to protect. The man, Evan Reed, Daniels called him, groaned as the deputies dragged him to his feet, his wiry frame slumped, blood seeping from the bite Luna had left on his arm. His curses faded under the sheriff's stern commands, but his glare lingered, a venomous shadow that chilled me even as he was hauled away. Luna whimpered, her body sagging against the rug, her pups, Raven, Cole, Mist, and Spark, safe upstairs with Ellie's blanket, untouched by the nightmare that had unfolded below. I pressed my hand to her fur, feeling the warmth beneath the wound, the pulse of a life that refused to break. And Ellie nestled closer, her small hand finding mine, her breath hitching as she fought to steady herself.
"She's so brave,"
she whispered, her voice thick with tears, and I nodded, my heart swelling with the truth of it. Luna had faced the dark for us, for her babies, with a courage I'd never known. Daniels sank beside us, his flashlight dimming as he rested it on the floor, his weathered face etched with a grim resolve. "Evan Reed," he said, his voice low, heavy with the weight of what he'd uncovered. "Runs a guard dog ring up in the hills, brutal stuff, training them with beatings, starvation, selling them to anyone with cash. Tara Miles worked for him, threatened to blow the whistle, then vanished 2 months back." His words sank into me like stones, each one a piece of Luna's story falling into place, the gash on her flank, the note she'd carried, the terror in her eyes when Reed's shadow crossed our snow. "Luna must have bolted with proof," he added, nodding at the crumpled note I pulled from my pocket. "Save me," its ink smudged but searing, a cry from Tara that Luna had carried through the storm to us. A vet arrived, her boots soft on the wood as she knelt to stitch Luna's wound, her hands steady where mine shook. Ellie clung to Luna's side, her small voice whispering, "You're so brave." A litany of love that steadied us both as the needle wove through fur and flesh. I watched, my chest tight with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Luna had bled for us, had faced a gun for us, and I hadn't seen it coming, hadn't protected her as she'd protected us. When the vet finished, Luna sighed, her head resting near her stitched shoulder, and Ellie's tears slowed, her small hand stroking the dog's ears with a tenderness that broke my heart open. I reached for my phone, dialing Tara's number again, my breath shallow as the rings stretched into silence. Then her voice, faint and trembling, answered. "She's safe," I said, my voice cracking. "He came, but she fought him off." Tara's sob broke through the line, a sound of relief so raw it mirrored my own.
"She knew where to go,"
she wept, her words a lifeline across the miles.
"She's everything to me. Thank you."
I swallowed hard, glancing at Luna, her eyes half closed but alive with a quiet triumph.
She's everything to us, too,
I whispered, and the call ended, leaving me with the echo of her gratitude, a bond forged through Luna's courage that tied us to a woman I'd never met. Reed glared as the deputies hauled him out, his threats swallowed by the night, but Luna's gaze held mine, unyielding, victorious, a mother who'd won this battle, who'd trusted us to stand with her. The cabin settled, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and fading fear, but Luna's presence anchored us, her strength a light in the aftermath. Daniel stood, his shadow long against the wall, and promised, "We'll find Tara. Luna's given us a start." His truck rumbled away, but I stayed by Luna, Ellie's head on my lap, her heartbeat a soft echo of mine. She'd saved us, not just from Reed, but from the isolation of our quiet lives, weaving us into her fight with a love that refused to break. As the night deepened, I knew this was only the beginning, a chapter closed but a story still unfolding, bound by a German shepherd who'd bled for us all. Morning broke over the cabin with a stillness that felt fragile, as if the world held its breath after the night's violence. The sun crept through the windows, its pale light spilling across the rug where Luna lay, her stitched shoulder a quiet testament to her courage, her pups, Raven, Cole, Mist, and Spark, tumbling around her in a dance of innocent life. Ellie sat beside them, her green eyes soft with a love that had deepened through the chaos, her small hands guiding the pups with a tenderness that mirrored Luna's own. I watched from the kitchen, my coffee trembling in my grip, the echoes of gunfire and Tara's voice. She knew where to go, still ringing in my ears. The cabin felt different now, its walls marked by a fight we hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. And Luna's presence was a steady heartbeat beneath it all, a mother who'd carried us through the dark with a strength I'd never forget. She stirred then, her brown eyes sharpening as she rose, her movement slow but deliberate, the graze on her shoulder pulling a faint whimper from her throat. Ellie looked up, her small brow furrowing.
She's okay, right, Mommy?
She asked, her voice trembling with a need for reassurance, and I nodded, setting my mug down to kneel beside her. "She's strong, sweet pea," I said, my hand resting on Luna's fur, feeling the warmth beneath the stitches, the pulse of a life that refused to fade. But Luna's gaze shifted to the door, her ears pricking, and she limped toward it, her claws scratching at the wood with a purpose that sent a shiver through me.
"She's showing us something,"
Ellie cried, her eyes wide with a child's intuition, her small frame scrambling to her feet as she tugged my sleeve. I opened the door, the cold air biting my skin as Luna led us into the yard, her steps unsteady but resolute. The snow lay thick, a blanket scarred by the night's chaos, boot prints, tire tracks, a story of struggle etched in white. She stopped by the shed, her nose pressing to a frozen patch near its base, and began to dig, her paws clawing at the ice with a determination that stole my breath.
"Help her, Mommy,"
Ellie urged, her small hands joining Luna's effort, her breath fogging in the chill as she scraped at the snow. My heart thudded, a mix of awe and dread driving me to my knees, my own hands digging into the frozen earth, the cold numbing my fingers as we uncovered a metal tin, its edges rusted but intact, buried like a secret waiting to be found. Luna sat back, her brown eyes fixed on us, her whine soft but insistent as I pried the lid open with trembling hands. Inside lay a treasure of truth, USB drives, their surfaces scratched, and a journal, its pages creased and stained, a lifeline from Tara's hands to ours. I opened the book, my breath catching as words spilled across the pages. Logs of beatings, dates and names. Photos slipped between the sheets. Emaciated dogs, their eyes hollow, their bodies broken by Evan Reed's cruelty. "He sold them," Tara had written, her handwriting shaky but fierce. "To men who didn't care, who paid for guards, not souls." My chest tightened, tears pricking my eyes as I saw Luna in those images. Not her, but her kin, her kind, tortured for profit, and I understood the gash on her flank, the terror in her flight. She'd escaped with this, her pups her strength, her hope a beacon that led her to us. Ellie's small hand touched mine, her voice a whisper.
"She's the best, Luna. She saved them,"
she said, her tears falling as she looked at the German shepherd, her love a fierce light in the cold. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, pulling her close as Luna watched, her mission complete, her burden lifted into our hands. I called Daniels, my voice steady despite the tremble in my core, and he arrived quickly, his jaw tightening as he took the tin, the evidence a weight that promised justice. "This'll bury him," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a resolve that echoed Luna's own, and I felt a surge of pride. For her, for us, for the fight she'd carried across the snow. The wind whispered through the pines, softer now, as if the world exhaled with her triumph. Luna sat by her pups, her gaze steady, her scars a map of valor, and Ellie hugged her, her voice fierce with a child's certainty. "You're a hero, Luna." Tears slipped down my cheeks as I watched them. Luna had trusted us to finish this, to right the wrongs she'd witnessed, and we had. She'd run, pregnant and bleeding, carrying this cash to us, a mother's plea woven with Tara's, and in the quiet of that morning I knew her courage had reshaped us, forging a bond that no shadow could break. The day faded into a soft dusk, the sky a bruised purple over the cabin as the weight of the past hours settled into our bones, a quiet ache mingling with the fragile hope that Luna's courage had kindled. She lay by the fire, her stitched shoulder a badge of her fight, her pups, Raven, Cole, Mist, and Spark, nestled against her, their tiny forms a testament to the life she'd guarded through the storm and the chaos that followed. Ellie sat close, her green eyes tracing their movements with a love so pure it seemed to glow, her small hands gentle as she adjusted the blanket around them, her voice a soft hum of comfort that filled the room. I stood by the window, my heart still racing from the tin's revelations, from Tara's voice echoing through the phone, a lifeline woven through Luna's scars that tied us to a woman I'd never seen but felt I knew. A knock shattered the stillness, soft but insistent, and my breath caught as I opened the door to a figure frail and shadowed. Tara, her thin frame wrapped in a coat too big, her eyes hollow but alive, glinting with a mixture of fear and relief. She stepped inside, her gaze finding Luna, and a sob broke from her lips, raw and ragged, a sound that carried the weight of months lost to darkness.
"Luna,"
she whispered, sinking to her knees beside the German shepherd, her hands trembling as she reached out, tears streaming down her cheeks as Luna lifted her head, her brown eyes meeting Tara's with a recognition that stopped my heart. Luna licked her face, a gentle swipe of her tongue that drew a laugh through Tara's sobs, a reunion that cracked me open with its tenderness, its unspoken bond forged in pain and survival.
"She escaped when he attacked me,"
Tara said, her voice trembling as she buried her fingers in Luna's fur, her words spilling out like a confession long held. "I was locked in a shack, chained. Reed thought I'd die there, but I told her to run, to find help. I didn't think she'd make it." Her eyes met mine, glistening with gratitude, and I sank beside her, Ellie pressing close, her small hand resting on Luna's side as if to anchor us all. "She found us," I whispered, my throat tight with the magnitude of it. Luna, pregnant and wounded, had crossed miles of snow with Tara's plea, with the tin that broke her silence, to reach our gate, to trust us with her life and Tara's. Ellie crawled forward, her voice soft but eager. "These are her babies, Raven, Cole, Mist, and Spark," she said, pointing to each pup with a pride that lit her face, her love a bridge between us. Tara smiled through her tears, a fragile curve that softened the hollows of her cheeks, and reached out to touch Spark's tiny head, her fingers shaking with awe. "She kept them safe," she murmured, her gaze returning to Luna, a mother's pride mirrored in her eyes, a shared strength that had defied Reed's cruelty. I watched, my chest aching with a mix of sorrow and joy. Luna had carried more than her pups. She'd carried Tara's hope, her fight, and delivered it to us, forging a family from strangers in the storm's shadow. Sheriff Daniels had called earlier. Reed faced a litany of charges: kidnapping, animal cruelty, attempted murder. His empire crumbling under the weight of the tin's evidence. Luna's scars a silent testimony to his crimes. Tara had been rescued from a shack miles away, found after Daniels traced the note's address. Her survival a miracle Luna had made possible. Luna's wound was healing, the vet's stitches holding strong, and her pups thrived, their small yips a song of resilience that filled the cabin. But as Tara prepared to leave, her thin frame steadying with each breath, Ellie's lip trembled, her voice breaking the quiet.
Will Luna come back?
She asked, her eyes glistening with a child's fear of loss, her hands clutching Luna's blanket like a lifeline. Tara turned, her smile widening through her tears. "She's yours too now," she said, her voice firm with a promise that warmed the room. "She'll live with me, but weekends, holidays, she'll be here. She chose you, and I won't take that away." Ellie's face lit up, her tears turning to a shaky laugh as she hugged Luna, her small arms fierce with love. I felt my own tears fall. A release of the fear and fight that had bound us, replaced by a gratitude that ran deep. For Luna, for Tara, for the bond that had grown from a desperate night. The cabin hummed with their presence, a sanctuary forged in the storm, and as Tara stroked Luna's ears, I knew this was healing. This was home, a family tied by a German shepherd's unwavering heart. The days softened after Tara's reunion with Luna, the cabin settling into a quiet rhythm that felt like healing, like the first breath after a long, suffocating night. The storm that had brought Luna to our gate was a distant memory now. Its snow melted into the earth, leaving behind a world washed clean, ready to bloom anew. Luna lay by the fire that evening, her black and tan fur gleaming in the glow, her stitched shoulder a fading scar of the battle she'd fought, her pups, Raven, Cole, Mist, and Spark, sprawling around her in a tangle of tiny limbs and playful yips. Ellie knelt beside them, her green eyes bright with a love that had grown roots deep in her small heart, her laughter a melody that wove through the room, stitching us back together after the chaos that had nearly torn us apart. Tara had taken Cole, her thin hands trembling with joy as she cradled him, a piece of Luna to carry back to her quiet life beyond the pines. We kept Raven, his dark fur a mirror of his mother's, his bold spirit a constant reminder of the night he'd been born into our care. Mist went to a trainer down the valley, her gentle eyes destined for rescue work, a legacy of Luna's courage that would echo through the mountains. Spark joined Daniel's deputy, his boundless energy a spark of light in the sheriff's stern world, a guardian born from a mother's fight. Luna split her time between us, her presence a bridge between Tara's home and ours, her weekends and holidays with Ellie a promise kept, a thread of trust that refused to break. The cabin became a hub of healing, its door open to the family Luna had forged from strangers, a sanctuary born in the storm's shadow. Tara's strength grew with each visit, her hollow cheeks filling out, her eyes losing their haunted edge as she poured her survival into a rescue. A sanctuary for dogs like Luna, funded by donations that poured in after Reed's arrest. His crimes, kidnapping, cruelty, murder attempts, crumbled under the weight of the tin Luna had carried, the evidence we'd unearthed in the snow sealing his fate behind bars. Ellie thrived in Luna's orbit, her small frame shadowing the German shepherd through the yard, her voice a constant stream of stories and songs that Luna seemed to hear with a tilt of her head, a bond that transcended words. I watched them from the porch, my coffee warm in my hands, my heart swelling with a pride I couldn't name. For Ellie, for Luna, for the way they'd reshaped our quiet lives into something vast and unbreakable. One night, as the fire burned low, Luna dozed by the hearth, her scars a map of valor etched into her fur. Her pups, now growing, scattered across homes, still alive in the way she watched over Ellie. My daughter nestled close, her head resting on Luna's side, her small hand tracing the stitches that had faded to silver threads. her breath slowing as sleep tugged at her.
Heroes find people who'll fight for them, she murmured.
Her voice soft with a wisdom that stole my breath, a truth she'd learned from Luna's journey. From the night a desperate mother had clawed at our gate and changed everything. Tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and warm, as I nodded, my hand resting on her curls, my gaze meeting Luna's half-open eyes. Steady, knowing, a silent agreement that we'd been her people, her fight, her home. If a German shepherd pleads at your gate, what would you do? The question lingered in my mind as I watched them, a challenge to the world beyond our walls, a call to the kindness Ellie had shown without hesitation, to the trust Luna had placed in us when all else had failed her. Luna's tail thumped once, a soft beat against the rug, and I felt it. A love, born from the wild, forged in the storm that had made us kin. Tara's rescue thrived. Ellie grew with Luna's shadow at her side, and I found a strength I hadn't known I had, a courage borrowed from a mother who'd defied the odds to save her own. The fire popped, a spark leaping free, and I smiled through my tears, the cabin alive with their presence. Luna, Ellie, the pups, Tara. A family woven from a desperate night, a bond that no shadow could sever. Tell us below, I thought, imagining the world beyond. Has an animal ever reshaped your life? Luna had, her paws leaving prints on our hearts, her courage, a light we'd carry forever. Like, subscribe, share your stories. This journey changed us. And as Luna's eyes closed, her breath sinking with Ellie's, I knew. Some bonds are born in the wild, tested in the dark, and endure beyond the storm, eternal and unbroken.